Good morning, second and third grade, and welcome back to music class. So lately, we have been talking about different kinds of music, right? Last week we talked about rock and roll music, and this week we're going to talk about a different kind of music that's a little bit different than rock and roll. So I'm going to make you guess what kind of music it is, because I just don't want to tell you. That would be boring. So I'm going to play you two songs. And first, I want you to think about if you've ever heard these songs. And second, I want you to think about if you know what kind of music this is, okay? Here's the first one. Okay, so have you heard that before? Odds are you probably have. You might not know the name of it, but that is found in a lot of like commercials and movies and stuff like that, so you probably heard that before. And if you haven't, that's okay. Here's the second song. Okay, so have you heard that one before? That one you might have heard before too, again in a lot of commercials and movies. And now the question is, what kind of music is that? I'll give you a moment to guess while I take a drink of my coffee. Have you guessed classical music? You are correct. Today we are going to be learning more about classical music, and not only that, but we are going to be learning specifically about a man named Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Okay? Have you heard of Mozart? You might have. You might not have. That's okay. He was one of the greatest classical musicians of all time. Some even say he was one of the greatest musicians of all time in general, which is why we're going to learn about it. I have this book here, and I'm going to go ahead and read it to you to tell you a story about one of the greatest musicians who has ever lived. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was a very interesting man, and I can't wait for you to find out more about his life. So let's get started. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was born in Salzburg, Austria, that's in Europe, in 1756. Just think about that for a moment. 1756. That's a long, long time ago. Many people think he was the greatest composer who ever lived. Even though Mozart's music was very popular during his time when he was alive, he often struggled to make a living, which just means that a lot of times he didn't really have a lot of money, even though he was super famous and popular. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart had a very remarkable childhood. He and his sister, named Nannerl, isn't that an interesting name, Nannerl, who was 4 years older than him, traveled all over with their parents playing music for all of the royal families of Europe. Wolfgang's father, Leopold Mozart, so far we have Wolfgang, Nannerl, and Leopold. Very interesting names. His father was named Leopold. So Wolfgang's father, Leopold Mozart, was a composer and violinist in the court of Salzburg. Mr. Mozart, the father, was happily surprised to find that his daughter, Nannerl, had a special talent when he began giving her clavier lessons. A clavier is a keyboard instrument similar to a piano. Nannerl quickly learned to play the most difficult pieces. Mr. Mozart was really surprised, though, when he noticed Wolfgang trying to play the same pieces that Nannerl had been practicing. When he was only 3 years old, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart already had a very unusual understanding of music. When he was 4 years old, he learned to play the violin perfectly. This is very interesting because I learned to play the violin when I was around 4 years old. And let me tell you, I could not play it perfectly when I was 4. In fact, I sounded pretty bad. So he learned how to play the violin perfectly when he was just 4 years old. This is very interesting. When he was only 6 years old, Wolfgang wrote a concerto, a difficult music form even for an experienced grown-up to write. So I want to take a moment to show you something, okay? Again, when Mozart was 6 years old, he wrote a concerto. And I want to show you what a concerto is, because I used to play concertos, and I still do, but I would play them when I was in college. So I have a concerto here that I want to show you, just to show you what Mozart was writing when he was 6 years old, okay? So this is a concerto. You can see all my little markings on it. I played this when I was in college. It's multiple pages of crazy, crazy music, okay? Look at this. Mozart was writing this when he was 6. Some of you guys were just recently 6. I don't think any of you guys are still 6. But this, Mozart wrote something like this when he was 6 years old, okay? Mr. and Mrs. Mozart, the mom and dad, soon realized Wolfgang and Nannerl were different from other children. In 1762, when Wolfgang was 6 and Nannerl was 10, Mr. Mozart decided it was time to travel and show his talented children to the world. So basically, Wolfgang and Nannerl's mom and dad decided their kids were too talented, and they thought, we need to have them go play concerts for people. We need to show people how amazing our kids are. Okay. However, trips during this time were very difficult and even dangerous. Sometimes coaches could travel only a few miles a day because of breakdowns or bumpy, rut-filled roads. During this time, people had to travel in what we call stage coaches, which were basically a horse and a buggy, and it was very difficult to travel in these. Also, it was really cold most of the time, and a lot of the inns, or hotels, where the Mozarts would stay at night were very uncomfortable. Fortunately, though, Wolfgang and Nannerl loved performing for audiences so much that they never seemed to mind. They also enjoyed seeing the great cities of Europe, like Vienna, Paris, and London. Because they were traveling so much, they got to see all those cool cities. Some people thought that Mr. Mozart, the dad, was taking advantage of his children by making them work hard for their money. But Mr. Mozart was a good father who really loved his children and was concerned about their future. He felt that if Wolfgang and Nannerl became famous at an early age, they would have a way better chance of making a living as musicians when they grew up. Making money had always been a problem for the Mozart family. Even when audiences went wild over their performances, though, the Mozart children were often paid with gifts instead of money. What Mr. Mozart really needed was money to pay for the stage coaches, the hotels, the clothing, and the food. But they weren't getting money. They were just getting gifts. Everything was going well. But then something happened. In 1768, Wolfgang was asked to compose and conduct an opera in Vienna for Emperor Joseph II. And for some reason, the emperor's musicians started to give Wolfgang a really hard time. It's important to remember that at this time, Wolfgang was about 12 years old. Okay, so can you imagine a little 12-year-old trying to conduct a big orchestra? This says that maybe the emperor's musicians were jealous of Wolfgang, or maybe they would be afraid that they would look bad since they were being directed by a 12-year-old boy. They caused so many annoying problems that Mr. Mozart gave up trying to put the opera together, and he took Wolfgang home. Another problem was that Wolfgang and Nannerl were suddenly growing up, and people didn't find them quite as cute and remarkable as they once had. Wolfgang knew that he would have to amaze people now, not by his cuteness, but by writing and playing the best music ever. So what do you think he did? Do you think he made the best music ever? He did. He then made the best music ever. It was then in Vienna that Wolfgang fell in love and married a singer named Constance Weber. Wolfgang had some of his happiest times of his life in Vienna and wrote many of his greatest works. But as time went on, Wolfgang got himself into money problems again, like he always did. He had to work day and night to put on concerts and even write music for special occasions. Even with Constance's help and encouragement, Wolfgang Mozart's health started to get worse. And finally, after Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart finished the Magic Flute, one of his best pieces he ever wrote, he wasn't well at all. He used all of his energy he had to compose a piece called the Requiem, and he died before he could finish it. tragic. Wolfgang was only 35 years old when he died. That's very sad because that's not very old. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart wrote more than 800 pieces of music. In fact, it's usually hard for people to choose a favorite type because so many of them are so wonderful to listen to. Almost all of Mozart's music seems to have a mysterious power and beauty to it. And that's why we still listen to Mozart's music today, and we still talk about him, because the pieces he wrote back in the 1700s are still listened to today, and I think that's amazing. So, I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. And that is all. I will see you soon.